The crack of a pistol echoed through the dusty streets of Cedar Springs, Wyoming Territory, in the summer of 1875, sending Hannah Newman ducking behind her trunk at the stagecoach stop. She wasn't in town 5 minutes, and already gunfire confirmed every terrible thing she'd heard about her future husband. The infamous Henry Sutton, the man whose letters had painted a picture so different from his reputation that she'd traveled over 1,000 miles to marry him. "Welcome to Cedar Springs, madam," the stagecoach driver said with a wry grin as he set her second trunk on the weathered boards of the platform. "Don't you worry about that noise, just the sheriff dealing with some troublemakers." Hannah straightened, brushing the wrinkles from her blue traveling dress, attempting to maintain her dignity despite the racing of her heart. 22 years old, and she'd never heard a gunshot outside of holiday celebrations back in Boston. She gripped her reticule tighter, the newspaper clipping inside it suddenly feeling heavier. The article about Henry Sutton, the Wolf of Wyoming, detailed his ruthlessness in business and his deadly reputation with a gun. "Is there somewhere I might wait for Mr. Sutton?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The driver pointed to a whitewashed building across the street. "That's Widow Parker's boarding house. Most respectable place in town. You can wait there if Sutton's running late." Hannah thanked him and gathered her courage along with her smaller bag. The larger trunks would have to wait. As she crossed the dusty street, the sounds of men arguing drifted from the saloon. She quickened her pace, keeping her eyes fixed on the boarding house's neat porch with its hanging baskets of petunias. The door to the saloon swung open just as she passed, and a tall figure emerged, silhouetted against the bright interior. Hannah froze, her breath catching as the man stepped into the sunlight. "Miss Newman?" His voice was deep but gentle, nothing like the growl she had imagined. She nodded, unable to find her voice as she took in the man before her. Henry Sutton stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and trim-waisted in a black vest over a crisp white shirt. His face was sun-darkened and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. At perhaps 30 years of age, he carried himself with the confident ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, clear blue and assessing, yet warm as they studied her face. "I apologize for not meeting your stage," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair with touches of silver at the temples. "There was a situation that required my attention." "The gunshots," Hannah said, finding her voice at last. "Was that you?" Something shifted in his expression, concern, perhaps, or resignation. "You've heard stories about me." It wasn't a question. Hannah swallowed hard, remembering the letters they'd exchanged over the past 6 months. Letters filled with descriptions of his ranch, his hopes for a family, his promise of a good life, letters that had convinced her to leave everything familiar behind. "I've heard many things, Mr. Sutton," she admitted. "I'm reserving judgment until I learn the truth for myself." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "That's fair, Miss Newman, more than fair." He gestured toward her bags. "May I?" She nodded, and he effortlessly lifted her trunk with one hand and offered his other arm to her. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her gloved hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his sleeve. "I've arranged rooms for you at Widow Parker's," he explained as they walked. "I thought you might appreciate some time to rest after your journey before we discuss our arrangement further." Our arrangement. The words hung between them, reminding Hannah of the reality of her situation. She had agreed to marry this man, a stranger, really, despite their correspondence in exchange for passage west and the promise of a secure future. "That's thoughtful of you," she said. "I would welcome the chance to refresh myself." They reached the boarding house, where a plump woman with silver-streaked hair greeted them warmly. "Widow Parker," Henry said. "This is Miss Hannah Newman from Boston." "Welcome to Cedar Springs, my dear," Widow Parker said, her kind eyes taking in Hannah's travel-worn appearance. "I've prepared my best room for you with a hot bath waiting." Hannah nearly wept at the thought of washing away the dust of travel. "Thank you, that sounds heavenly." Henry set her trunk inside the doorway. "I'll have the rest of your belongings brought over. Would you care to join me for dinner this evening? 7 o'clock at the hotel dining room." Hannah nodded, studying his face for any hint of the dangerous man she'd read about. 7 o'clock would be fine. After he departed with a polite tip of his hat, Widow Parker led Hannah upstairs, chattering all the way. "You're a brave one, coming all this way to marry Mr. Sutton," the widow said as she opened the door to a neat, sunlit room. "You know of our arrangement?" Hannah asked, embarrassed. "Everyone knows everything in Cedar Springs, dear. Small towns have few secrets." She patted Hannah's arm. "Don't you worry, Mr. Sutton is a good man despite what you might have heard." Hannah set her reticule on the bed. "The newspaper accounts paint him quite differently." "Newspapers," Widow Parker scoffed. "They only tell the parts of stories that sell papers. You'll see the truth for yourself soon enough." She gestured toward a screen in the corner. "Your bath is behind there. Take your time and I'll bring up some tea when you're finished." Left alone, Hannah sank onto the edge of the bed, the exhaustion of her journey finally catching up with her. She pulled the newspaper clipping from her reticule and read it again. Henry Sutton, known to many as the Wolf of Wyoming, demonstrated his ruthless nature once more during Tuesday's confrontation with the Harrington mining interests. Sutton, whose control of local cattle operations has expanded rapidly since his arrival 3 years ago, reportedly told Harrington's men that those who challenge my territory will be dealt with permanently. Sutton's reputation with a gun is well established, having reportedly killed 3 men in his defense of what he claims as his rightful business. The article continued, describing Henry as calculating, dangerous, and feared throughout the territory. Hannah folded the paper carefully and tucked it away. Tomorrow she would see his ranch, and soon after, she would either become his wife or find herself stranded in this wild country, far from everything familiar. She undressed and slipped into the bath, allowing the warm water to wash away her immediate worries. Henry Sutton didn't seem like the cold-blooded businessman described in the papers. But then, what did she truly know of men like him? Her sheltered life in Boston had hardly prepared her for the raw reality of the West. One thing was certain: she would need to understand the true nature of the man she had agreed to marry before she could decide whether to honor that agreement. That evening, precisely at 7, Hannah entered the hotel dining room wearing her best dress, a deep green silk that complemented her auburn hair. Henry stood as she approached, his appreciative gaze making her cheeks warm. "You look lovely, Miss Newman," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you." She settled into her seat, noticing how other diners glanced their way with undisguised interest. "It seems we're providing the evening's entertainment." Henry's mouth curved into a smile. "You're the first mail-order bride to arrive in Cedar Springs this year. That alone would make you noteworthy. Being my intended makes you positively fascinating." The waiter brought wine, and Henry waited until they were alone again before continuing. "I imagine you have questions for me," he said, meeting her gaze directly. Hannah appreciated his straightforwardness. "I do." She took a small sip of wine for courage. "The gunshots I heard when I arrived, were you involved?" "Yes." His answer was simple, unadorned. "A cattle rustler was attempting to escape custody. Sheriff Adams asked for my assistance." "Are you a deputy?" "No. But I have a vested interest in justice being served when it comes to cattle theft." He studied her face. "Does that trouble you?" Hannah considered his answer. "I suppose that depends on the nature of your assistance." I fired into the air to startle his horse. The man fell and was recaptured. Henry's eyes never left hers. "I didn't shoot him, if that's what you're asking." Relief washed over her, though she tried not to show it. "I've read accounts of your reputation, Mr. Sutton. They paint you as quite dangerous." "Henry, please." He leaned back, seeming to weigh his words. "My reputation serves a purpose, Miss Newman. In this territory, a man who's feared has fewer problems than one who's seen as weak." His expression softened slightly. but a reputation and a man's true character aren't always aligned. Their food arrived tender steaks, potatoes, and fresh vegetables that made Hannah realize how hungry she was. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before she gathered her courage again. In your letters, you described your ranch and your hopes for it. You mentioned wanting a partner, not just a housekeeper or a convenience. She felt her cheeks flush. Was that the truth? Henry set down his fork, his expression serious. Every word I wrote to you was honest, Miss Newman. I've built something substantial here: land, cattle, a future. But a man alone is just that, alone. I want someone to share it with, someone who might grow to care for it as I do. He hesitated. Someone who might grow to care for me as well, given time. There was vulnerability in his words that touched Hannah unexpectedly. This didn't sound like the cold-blooded businessman from the newspaper accounts. I appreciate your honesty, she said. And please call me Hannah, he nodded, a genuine smile warming his features. Hannah, then. Tomorrow I'd like to show you the ranch. It's about 10 miles outside of town, not a difficult ride if you're comfortable on horseback. I grew up riding in the parks of Boston, she admitted, though I expect Western riding is quite different. We'll take it slow, he promised. And if you're too tired from your journey, we can wait another day. No, I'd like to see it to see where I might be living. She took another sip of wine. That is if I decide to stay. His expression sobered. Of course. Our agreement was clear. You have 2 weeks to decide whether our arrangement suits you. If not, I'll provide passage back to Boston. He paused. Though I hope you'll give Cedar Springs and me a fair chance. Hannah nodded. That was always my intention. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly as Henry asked about her journey west and her life in Boston. He proved to be an attentive listener, and Hannah found herself relaxing in his company. By the time he escorted her back to the boarding house, she was beginning to think that perhaps the newspaper accounts had exaggerated his fearsome nature. As they reached the porch, Henry stopped and turned to face her. Thank you for a pleasant evening, Hannah. I'll call for you at 9 tomorrow morning if that suits. It does. Thank you for dinner. He hesitated, then said quietly, I want you to know that I understand your reservations. My reputation in these parts is complicated. But I hope you'll judge me based on what you see and experience, not on stories you may have heard. Hannah studied his face in the lamplight from the porch. There was earnestness there, and something else, a hopefulness that made her heart beat a little faster. I promise to keep an open mind, she said softly. He nodded, seeming satisfied. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Henry. As she watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness, Hannah felt a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. Tomorrow she would see his ranch, the place that might become her home. And perhaps she would begin to discover the true nature of the man she had traveled so far to marry. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through Hannah's window. She dressed carefully in her most practical outfit, a navy blue skirt with enough fullness for riding astride if necessary, and a crisp white shirtwaist. After a hearty breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and strong coffee provided by Widow Parker, she was ready when Henry arrived precisely at 9. He looked different today, more rancher than businessman in his worn leather vest, chambray shirt, and sturdy boots. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing a lock of dark hair that fell across his forehead, giving him a boyish quality at odds with his imposing height. Good morning, he said, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. You look ready for a day in the country. I hope so, Hannah replied, securing her hat with a pin. Though I confess I'm not entirely sure what to expect, Henry smiled. Expect dust, sunshine, and some of the most beautiful land God ever created. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Hannah found herself smiling in return as he helped her into the wagon he'd brought. Unlike the battered vehicles she'd seen around town, this one was well maintained, with a comfortable sprung seat and a canopy to provide shade. As they left the town behind, The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in grass that rippled like water in the morning breeze, dotted with sagebrush, and the occasional cluster of cottonwood trees marking the presence of water. The sky stretched endlessly above, a deeper blue than Hannah had ever seen in Boston. "It's breathtaking," she murmured, taking in the vastness of it all. "That it is," Henry agreed, his voice soft with affection. "The first time I saw this country, I knew I'd found home. Where were you before?" Hannah asked, realizing how little she knew of his past despite their correspondence. "Originally Missouri, but after the war I drifted. Texas, Kansas, Nebraska." His hands were steady on the reins, confident. "Worked cattle drives mostly, saving every dollar until I had enough to buy my first piece of land." "You fought in the war." She studied his profile, wondering which side he had supported. "Union cavalry," he said simply. "Enlisted at 17, came out at 21 with nothing but the clothes on my back and too many memories." He glanced at her. "But that's ancient history now." Hannah nodded, understanding his reluctance to dwell on those difficult years. "And how did you come to Wyoming territory?" A smile touched his lips. "I followed a herd of cattle up from Texas in '72. When we crossed this valley, I knew I'd found what I'd been looking for. Bought 500 acres from a homesteader who'd had enough of winter blizzards and summer dust. Added more land as I could afford it. And now?" Hannah prompted. "Now the Circle S runs 20,000 acres and nearly 5,000 head of cattle." There was pride in his voice, but not boastfulness. "We employ 15 hands full-time, more during roundup and branding." Hannah was impressed despite herself. To build such an operation in just 3 years suggested both business acumen and tremendous work ethic. "Your letters mentioned a house." "Almost there," Henry said, pointing to a rise ahead. Just over that ridge, as they crested the hill, Hannah's breath caught. Below them, nestled in a protected valley where a creek meandered through stands of cottonwoods, stood a large 2-story house built of golden-hued logs. A wide porch wrapped around the front and one side, and glass windows gleamed in the morning light. Nearby stood a substantial barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings, all well-maintained. "Oh," she said softly, unable to find other words. Henry watched her reaction, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I built it with a family in mind," he said quietly. "Too big for just one man." The admission touched Hannah deeply. In his letters, he had spoken of wanting children someday, but seeing the tangible evidence of his hopes made them real in a way words hadn't. As they approached the house, Hannah noticed flower beds along the porch and climbing roses just beginning to bloom against the railings. Not what she would have expected from a bachelor rancher with a fearsome reputation. "Mrs. Garcia takes care of the gardens," Henry explained, following her gaze. "She and her husband Miguel live in the smaller cabin behind the main house. She cooks and keeps house, he handles the horses and helps manage the hands." He assisted Hannah from the wagon and offered his arm to escort her up the porch steps. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump, smiling woman with silver-streaked black hair and warm brown eyes. "Mrs. Garcia," Henry said, "may I present Miss Hannah Newman from Boston." "Hannah, this is Alina Garcia, without whom this place would likely fall apart within a week." "Bah, he exaggerates," Mrs. Garcia said, her accent musical. "Welcome, Miss Newman. We have been preparing for your arrival." She gave Hannah a warm smile. "Come inside out of the sun. I have lemonade waiting." The interior of the house surprised Hannah even more than its exterior. The main floor featured a spacious sitting room with comfortable furniture, a dining room that could easily seat a dozen people, and a kitchen that was both functional and inviting. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes ranging from practical ranching guides to classics of literature. "You have quite a library," Hannah remarked, running her finger along the spine of a leather-bound copy of Shakespeare's collected works. Henry looked almost embarrassed. "Winter nights are long here. Reading helps pass the time." Mrs. Garcia served them lemonade and freshly baked cookies before tactfully withdrawing, leaving Hannah and Henry alone in the sitting room. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" he asked after they'd refreshed themselves. Hannah nodded, and he led her through the rooms, pointing out features with obvious pride. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, including a large master chamber with windows facing east to catch the morning light. The room held a massive oak bed, a dresser, and a washstand, all of excellent quality. "This would be your room, our room," Henry said, then quickly added, "if you decide to stay, of course. If not, it's yours alone for as long as you're here." Hannah appreciated his sensitivity. In their letters, they had discussed the practical aspects of their arrangement with surprising frankness. Henry had made it clear that while he hoped for a true marriage in all senses, he would not press for marital relations until she was comfortable. "It's a beautiful room," she said, moving to the window that offered a sweeping view of the ranch and the mountains beyond. "The entire house is lovely, Henry. You've created something remarkable here." His expression softened with pleasure at her praise. "Thank you. Would you like to see the rest of the ranch? We could ride out or continue with the wagon if you prefer." "I think I'd like to ride," Hannah decided, wanting to experience this land as he did. "If you have a suitable mount for me." Henry's smile widened. "I believe we can find something appropriate." At the barn, he introduced her to a gentle chestnut mare named Daisy. While a young ranch hand saddled their horses, Henry showed Hannah around the immediate area, pointing out the smokehouse, the chicken coop, the kitchen garden, and the small orchard of apple and cherry trees he'd planted 2 years prior. "You've thought of everything," she said, impressed by the self-sufficiency of the operation. "When the nearest town is 10 miles away, you learn to provide for yourself," he replied. "Though Cedar Springs is growing, we even have a proper doctor now, not just a barber who pulls teeth." Once mounted, they rode at a leisurely pace through rolling pastures where sleek cattle grazed. Henry pointed out landmarks and boundaries, occasionally stopping to let her admire particularly beautiful vistas. His knowledge of the land was intimate. He could identify every plant, explain which grasses were best for cattle, and predict weather changes from the slightest shift in the wind. "You truly love it here, don't you?" Hannah observed as they paused atop a rise overlooking a meandering creek. Henry gazed at the landscape, his expression open and unguarded. "I do, this land, it gets into your blood." He looked at her directly. "I know it must seem very different from Boston." "It is," she acknowledged, "but there's a beauty here I never expected." The vastness that had initially seemed intimidating now felt exhilarating. "There's a sense of possibility." Something flickered in Henry's eyes. Hope, perhaps. "That's exactly it, possibility." He hesitated before adding, "I hope you might come to see those possibilities for yourself, Hannah." The sincerity in his voice touched her. This man, who reportedly struck fear into the hearts of his business rivals, was showing her a gentleness she hadn't anticipated. Yet questions remained. "Henry," she began carefully, "in town yesterday I noticed how people reacted to you. Some seemed afraid. Why is that if you're truly as you appear to me now?" His expression grew serious. "The West can be dangerous, Hannah. When I first came here, this valley was contested territory. Rustlers, land grabbers, men who'd take whatever they wanted if they thought they could get away with it." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I learned quickly that showing weakness invited predators, so I cultivated a certain reputation. By force," she pressed. "When necessary," he admitted. "I've never killed a man except in self-defense, but I won't deny I've used intimidation to protect what's mine." His eyes met hers again. "The newspaper accounts you've read, they exaggerate, but they're not entirely false. I've done what was needed to build this ranch and keep it safe." Hannah appreciated his honesty even as it confirmed some of her concerns. "And now, is such a reputation still necessary?" Henry considered the question. "Less so. The territory is settling. We have more law now, more civilization." His expression softened. "Which is why I wrote to you, Hannah. I'm ready for something different, a home that's more than just a fortress, a life that's about building something, not just defending it." His words resonated with Hannah's own hopes. She had come west seeking not just security, but purpose, a chance to be more than just an unmarried daughter in her parents' home, facing a future of increasing dependency as their health failed. "I understand wanting to build something meaningful," she said quietly. They continued their ride, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Henry pointed out a family of deer drinking at the creek, taught her to identify different bird calls, and showed her where wild strawberries grew in a sunny clearing. By the time they returned to the ranch house for a late lunch, Hannah felt more at ease with both the land and the man. Mrs. Garcia had prepared a delicious meal of chicken, fresh vegetables from the garden, and apple pie for dessert. As they ate on the porch, enjoying the gentle breeze, Hannah found herself imagining what life might be like here, the rhythm of seasons, the daily tasks, the gradual building of a shared life. "What are you thinking?" Henry asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm trying to picture myself here," she admitted. "To imagine what my days would be like." Henry nodded, understanding. "And can you see it, yourself here, I mean?" "Parts of it," she said honestly. "The house, the land, it's all more beautiful than I expected, and you." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You're not entirely what I expected either." A smile touched his lips. "Is that good or bad?" "Good, I think." She set her teacup down. "But I still have so many questions, so much I don't know about you." "Ask me anything," he offered. "I want you to make an informed decision, Hannah." She considered what she most wanted to understand. "The article I read mentioned a confrontation with someone named Harrington. What was that about?" Henry's expression darkened slightly. "James Harrington. He arrived about a year ago with Eastern money and big plans to start silver mining operations in the hills north of here." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Problem is, those hills include water sources that feed this entire valley. His mining methods would poison the creeks that my cattle and everyone else's depend on." "So you opposed him?" Hannah prompted. "I did, publicly and forcefully." Henry's jaw tightened. "When reasoning failed, I organized the other ranchers. We made it clear that we wouldn't allow our livelihoods to be destroyed for his profit. The newspaper suggested threats were made." Henry met her gaze directly. "I told him that anyone who poisoned our water would answer for it. The newspaper chose to interpret that dramatically." He sighed. "Harrington backed down temporarily, but he hasn't given up. He's in Denver now, trying to secure government backing for his plans." Hannah could see the genuine concern in Henry's eyes. This wasn't just about business, it was about protecting land he loved. "I can understand why you'd fight for this place," she said softly. Relief flickered across his features. "Most women from the East wouldn't. They'd see only the harshness, the isolation." "Perhaps I'm not most women," Hannah said with a small smile. Henry's answering smile warmed his entire face. "No, I don't believe you are." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility until Mrs. Garcia appeared to clear their plates. "Will Miss Newman be staying for dinner?" she asked, her knowing eyes moving between them. Henry looked to Hannah questioningly. "I should return to town before dark," she said regretfully. "I haven't fully unpacked yet, and Widow Parker will worry." Henry nodded. "Of course, but perhaps you might come again tomorrow. There's more of the ranch I'd like to show you." The eagerness in his expression was endearing. "I'd like that," Hannah said. They rode back to Cedar Springs as the afternoon shadows lengthened, talking easily about books they'd both read and sharing stories from their respective childhoods. By the time they reached the boarding house, Hannah felt she'd learned more about Henry Sutton in one day than in all their previous correspondence. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Thank you for today," he said, holding her gaze. "For giving this place a chance." "Thank you for showing me," she replied. Standing close to him, she was struck again by his height, by the quiet strength he radiated, yet there was nothing threatening in his presence now, only warmth. "Until tomorrow, then," he said softly. "Until tomorrow." As Hannah watched him drive away, she realized that her fear of the wolf of Wyoming had been replaced by curiosity about the man beneath the reputation, a man who built a house for a family he didn't yet have, who planted orchards that would take years to mature, who fought fiercely to protect what he loved. She was beginning to understand that Henry Sutton's fearsome reputation might not be a reflection of cruelty, but rather the armor he had donned to protect his dreams in a harsh land. Over the next several days, Hannah fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were spent at the boarding house, writing letters home and becoming acquainted with Cedar Springs. The small but growing town boasted a general store, a dressmaker's shop, 2 saloons, a small church, and various other establishments catering to the surrounding ranches. In her explorations, she discovered that opinions about Henry varied widely. The banker spoke of him with respect bordering on reverence, crediting Henry's investments with much of the town's growth. The shopkeepers described him as fair in his dealings, if occasionally intimidating. But the saloon keeper's wife warned Hannah in hushed tones about his dangerous temper and how he'd once run a card cheat out of town at gunpoint. Each afternoon, Henry would arrive to take her to the ranch, each visit revealing new aspects of the operation and the man himself. He showed her the spring roundup in progress, where cowhands skillfully separated calves for branding. He took her to the highest point on his property, where they could see for miles in every direction. He introduced her to his prized breeding bulls and the thoroughbred horses he was raising alongside his working stock. Through it all, Hannah observed how the ranch hands responded to him with respect rather than fear, with loyalty rather than mere obedience. Miguel Garcia clearly adored his employer, telling Hannah stories of Henry's fairness and generosity when no one else would hire a Mexican foreman. On the 5th day, as they rode along the eastern boundary of the ranch, Hannah finally asked the question that had been forming in her mind. "Henry, why did you choose me? You could have advertised for a bride locally. Surely there are unmarried women in the territory who would jump at the chance to marry a successful rancher." He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "There are. But most of them want the ranch more than they want the rancher." His eyes met hers. "Your letters were different. You asked about books and ideas, not just about property and cattle counts. You wrote about wanting purpose, not just security." A smile touched his lips. "And you weren't afraid to disagree with me, even in writing." Hannah remembered their spirited exchange about women's suffrage, which Wyoming territory had granted several years earlier. "I thought I might have offended you with some of my opinions. On the contrary, you made me think." His expression grew more serious. "Out here, it's easy to become isolated, not just physically, but in your thinking. I wanted someone who would challenge me, not just agree with everything I said because I own land." His answer pleased her more than she expected. "And now that we've met." "Am I what you expected?" Henry's gaze traveled over her face, lingering in a way that made her cheeks warm. "You're more than I dared hope for, Hannah Newman." The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. Over the past days, she'd seen glimpses of the hardness that had earned him his reputation, his unflinching discipline when a hand mishandled a horse, the cold precision with which he dispatched a rattlesnake that threatened their path. But she'd also witnessed tenderness in how he cared for an orphaned calf, passion when he spoke of his plans for the ranch's future, and a dry humor that frequently made her laugh. "You surprise me too," she admitted. "You're not the cold-hearted businessman from the newspaper accounts." "Only when I need to be," he said, his expression growing distant. "This country doesn't reward softness, Hannah, not yet anyway." They had reached a small pond surrounded by cottonwoods, their new spring leaves shimmering in the breeze. Henry suggested they stop to rest the horses, and they dismounted, settling on a fallen log near the water's edge. "A week ago, when I stepped off that stagecoach, I was terrified," Hannah confessed, watching a pair of ducks paddle across the pond. "I'd convinced myself I was marrying a monster for the sake of security." Henry winced slightly. "And now," she turned to face him fully, "now I'm not afraid of you, Henry Sutton, but I am afraid of how quickly my feelings for you are growing." Surprise and hope flashed across his features. "Hannah, please, let me finish." She took a steadying breath. "I came west prepared to make a practical arrangement, a business transaction essentially, but what's developing between us doesn't feel like business." She met his gaze, "and that's both wonderful and frightening." Henry reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I understand. I expected to offer a partnership, not—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Not this pull I feel toward you, not this desire to be a better man than I've been." The vulnerability in his admission moved her. Impulsively, Hannah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, a brief, chaste kiss that nevertheless sent her heart racing. "Thank you for your honesty," she whispered. When she began to pull away, Henry's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch feather light. "May I?" he asked, his voice husky. At her nod, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with shared hunger. Hannah had been kissed before hurried, awkward encounters at social gatherings in Boston, but never like this. Never with this sense of falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting for you all my life, Hannah Newman." The ride back to the ranch was charged with a new awareness between them. By unspoken agreement, they returned earlier than usual, both needing time to absorb what had transpired. As Henry helped her down from her horse at the boarding house, he asked, "Will you come to the ranch for dinner tomorrow night? Elena is planning something special." "I'd like that very much," Hannah replied, her cheeks warming at his pleased smile. That night, Hannah sat at the small desk in her room, attempting to write to her parents. How could she explain her changing feelings in mere words? How could she make them understand that the man she was coming to care for was so much more complex than his fearsome reputation suggested? In the end, she wrote simply, "Henry Sutton is not the man the newspapers describe. He is both stronger and gentler than those accounts suggest. His ranch is beautiful, and I find myself increasingly able to imagine a life here. Please trust that I am being careful with both my safety and my heart." She sealed the letter, knowing it would take weeks to reach Boston and that her parents would worry regardless of what she wrote. The distance between her old life and this new possibility yawned vast and unbridgeable. Yet as she prepared for bed, Hannah realized she no longer felt torn between two worlds. The Wyoming territory, with its harsh beauty and raw vitality, was beginning to feel more like home than the prim parlors of Boston ever had. And Henry Sutton, with his contradictions and complexities, was becoming more essential to her happiness than she had ever anticipated. The following evening, Hannah took special care with her appearance, selecting a pale blue dress that Henry had once commented brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Parker noticed her efforts and smiled knowingly, but made no comment as Hannah waited for Henry's arrival. He came promptly at 6, looking more polished than usual in a clean, dark suit. His appreciative gaze as she descended the boarding house stairs sent warmth spreading through her. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The drive to the ranch passed pleasantly, with Henry pointing out a family of antelope grazing in the distance, and Hannah sharing stories of her encounters with Cedar Springs' colorful residents. There was an easy companionship between them now, punctuated by glances that carried deeper meaning. At the ranch, Elena had outdone herself. The dining room table was set with the good china and silver, candles glowed in polished holders, and delicious aromas filled the air. Miguel offered Hannah a shy smile and a glass of wine before disappearing to see to the horses. "Elena has prepared her special chili rellenos," Henry explained as they sat. "It's a recipe from her grandmother in Mexico." The meal was magnificent stuffed peppers, tender beef, fresh tortillas, and vegetables from the kitchen garden, followed by a rich chocolate cake that Elena announced proudly was American style for the señorita. After dinner, Henry suggested a walk to enjoy the sunset. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. They strolled toward a small rise where a single oak tree stood sentinel over the valley. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Henry confessed as they reached it. "I often come here to think, especially when decisions are weighing on me." Hannah could see why. The view was spectacular, the ranch buildings below, the patchwork of pastures stretching toward the mountains, the last rays of sunlight painting everything in gold and amber. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Henry turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Hannah, I know we agreed to a 2-week period for you to decide, and we still have several days left in that agreement." His voice was earnest, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "But I find I can't wait any longer to tell you what's in my heart." Hannah's breath caught. "Henry, please let me finish." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "I know we started this as a practical arrangement. You needed security, I needed a partner for this ranch, but what's grown between us is so much more than I dared hope for." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Hannah Newman. Not just the idea of you, but the real woman you are, your courage in coming west, your open mind, your kind heart, your willingness to look beyond my reputation to see the man beneath." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. "Henry, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "You still have time to consider everything, I just needed you to know where I stand." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "Whatever you decide, I will honor it. If you choose to return to Boston, I'll arrange it as promised. But if you stay—" His voice roughened. "If you stay, I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of your trust." Hannah felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a long, locked door. The fears and doubts that had plagued her since reading that newspaper article seemed to fall away, leaving only clarity. "I don't need more time," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I came west looking for security, yes, but also purpose and meaning. I've found those things here, Henry, with you." She stepped closer to him. "The man I've come to know these past days isn't the fearsome figure from those newspaper accounts. He's complex and sometimes stern, but also kind and honorable and passionate about what matters to him." Hope blazed in Henry's eyes. "What are you saying, Hannah?" "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you too." The words, once spoken, felt absolutely right. "And that I want to stay. I want to build a life here with you." Joy transformed Henry's features. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. When he kissed her, Hannah felt as though every moment of her life had been leading to this man, this place, this future opening before them. "Marry me," Henry whispered against her lips. "Not because of our arrangement, but because we choose each other. Marry me because we're better together than apart." "Yes," Hannah answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Henry Sutton." They remained on the hilltop until the first stars appeared, planning their future together. Hannah would write to her parents immediately. The wedding could take place in 3 weeks' time, allowing her family the opportunity to travel west if they chose, though she doubted they would make such a journey. "The house needs a woman's touch," Henry said as they walked back, his arm around her waist. "I want you to make whatever changes you think necessary to make it feel like you're home too." Hannah leaned into his embrace, happiness bubbling through her. "It already feels like home," she admitted. "More so than Boston ever did." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Cedar Springs. Most of the town received it with enthusiasm, though Hannah noticed a few concerned looks and whispered conversations. She chose to focus on the positive reactions, Widow Parker's delight, Alina's joyful tears, the congratulations from the storekeeper and his wife. 3 days later, Hannah was shopping for fabric for her wedding dress when the confrontation she'd been half expecting finally occurred. A tall, elegantly dressed woman with steel gray hair approached her at the dry goods counter. "Miss Newman, I'm Margaret Harrington. My husband is James Harrington." Hannah tensed, recognizing the name. "Mrs. Harrington, how do you do?" The older woman studied her with sharp eyes. "I understand congratulations are in order. You're to marry Henry Sutton?" "Yes, in 2 weeks' time." Mrs. Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. I feel I must speak plainly, Miss Newman. Do you truly understand the man you're pledging yourself to? Hannah set down the bolt of cream-colored silk she'd been examining. I believe I do. Do you? Do you know he threatened my husband at gunpoint, that he's driven legitimate business interests away from this territory through intimidation and violence? I know there are two sides to every story, Mrs. Harrington, Hannah replied evenly. And I know that your husband's mining operations would threaten the water supply that every ranch in this valley depends on. Surprise flickered across the older woman's features. I see he's fed you his version of events. I've made my own observations and drawn my own conclusions, Hannah countered, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. Henry Sutton is not the villain your husband's newspapers portray him to be. Mrs. Harrington's expression hardened. My dear, you are young and clearly besotted. Sutton is dangerous, a man who takes what he wants and destroys those who stand in his way. James is merely trying to bring progress and prosperity to this backward territory. At the expense of those already building their lives here, Hannah said, her own resolve strengthening in the face of the woman's condescension. That's not progress, Mrs. Harrington, that's exploitation. The older woman drew herself up. You'll regret aligning yourself with him. When James returns from Denver with federal backing, Sutton's little empire will crumble. I'd hate to see you crushed in the falling debris. The thinly veiled threat sent a chill down Hannah's spine, but she refused to show fear. Thank you for your concern, but I've made my decision. I would appreciate it if you would respect that. Mrs. Harrington gave her a pitying look. As you wish. But remember, when his true nature reveals itself, there will be no one to blame but yourself. With that, she turned and swept from the store, leaving a wake of whispers behind her. Hannah completed her purchases with shaking hands, her mind racing. Should she tell Henry about the encounter? Would it only inflame the conflict between him and the Harringtons? She was still pondering this when she nearly collided with Sheriff Adams outside the store. Careful there, Miss Newman, the sheriff said, steadying her with a gentle hand. He was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes that belied his tough reputation. You look troubled. Everything all right? Hannah hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I just had a rather unpleasant conversation with Mrs. Harrington. The sheriff's expression darkened. That woman has a viper's tongue. Pay her no mind. She implied that her husband will be returning with federal backing for his mining operations, Hannah said. That Henry's empire would crumble. Sheriff Adams sighed heavily. I'd best warn Henry. Harrington's been in Denver for weeks, lobbying hard. He studied Hannah's face. Don't let her scare you, Miss Newman. Henry Sutton's a good man, despite what the Harringtons and their ilk might say. You don't find him dangerous? Hannah asked, needing to hear an unbiased opinion. The sheriff chuckled. Henry can be hard when the situation calls for it, but he's fair. Unlike some in these parts, he never takes more than his share or pushes those weaker than himself. His expression grew serious. I've been sheriff here for 15 years, seen men of all stripes come and go. The truly dangerous ones are those like Harrington men who wrap their greed in fancy words about progress, while caring nothing for the people already here. His assessment aligned so perfectly with Hannah's own observations that she felt a wave of relief. Thank you, Sheriff. That's reassuring to hear. You're making a good choice, Miss Newman, he said with a nod. Henry Sutton will stand by you through whatever comes, and that's worth more than gold in this territory. When Henry arrived to escort her back to the boarding house, Hannah told him about both conversations. His jaw tightened at the mention of Mrs. Harrington's threats, but he seemed unsurprised. James Harrington is a determined man, he said as they walked, and his wife is even more ambitious. They want this territory to develop according to their vision, with themselves at the top of the heap. Do you think he'll succeed in getting federal backing? Henry's expression was grim. It's possible. Money talks in Denver just as it does everywhere else. He squeezed her hand. But we won't face it alone. Every rancher in this valley has a stake in keeping our water clean. Together, we'll find a way to protect what matters. His confidence reassured her, as did his use of we rather than I. Already he was including her in his plans, treating her as a true partner. "I'm not afraid," she told him, and was surprised to realize it was true. The woman who had stepped off the stage coach a week ago, trembling at the sound of gunfire, seemed like a stranger now. Henry's smile warmed his entire face. "I know you're not. It's one of the things I love about you." The following days passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Elena and Widow Parker took charge of the food, while the ranch hands, under Miguel's direction, constructed a dance floor beside the house. Henry insisted on hiring a proper band from Cheyenne, and the local seamstress worked day and night on Hannah's dress. Hannah wrote daily letters to her family, pouring out her heart about her growing feelings for Henry and her conviction that she was making the right choice. Their replies, when they finally arrived, were cautiously supportive, though tinged with concern about her marrying a man with Henry's reputation. "They'll understand when they meet you," she assured Henry after reading him portions of her father's letter. "I hope they'll come west someday," he replied. "I'd like to show them that their daughter is well cared for." The night before their wedding, Henry hosted a small dinner at the ranch for Hannah and their closest friends, Sheriff Adams, Widow Parker, the Garcias, and the town doctor and his wife. The mood was festive, with toasts and good-natured teasing about married life. Later, as Henry walked Hannah to the wagon for the return trip to town her last night at the boarding house, he seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "What is it?" she asked when they were alone in the yard. He took her hands in his. "I just want you to be sure, Hannah, marriage out here isn't easy, especially to a man like me. There will always be those who see me as the villain in their story." Hannah reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I know who you are, Henry Sutton. Not the wolf of Wyoming, but a man who built something from nothing, who fights for what matters, who shows tenderness where it's earned." She smiled. "A man who plants orchards and builds rooms for children not yet born, that's who I'm choosing to marry." Relief and love transformed his features. He pulled her close, his kiss conveying what words could not: his devotion, his gratitude, his promise of a future together. Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Hannah dressed in her new gown of cream silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, simpler than what she might have worn in Boston, but perfect for a Wyoming bride. Widow Parker helped arrange her hair and placed a crown of spring flowers on her head. "You look radiant, my dear," the older woman said, her eyes misty. "Henry Sutton is a fortunate man indeed." The ceremony took place on the ranch beneath the oak tree where Henry had proposed. The entire town turned out, along with ranchers from miles around. Even those who had initially warned Hannah about her choice seemed caught up in the joy of the occasion. Henry waited for her beneath the oak, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him on Sheriff Adams' arm. The local minister kept the service brief, speaking of commitment and partnership in a harsh but rewarding land. When they exchanged vows, Henry's voice was steady and sure, his eyes conveying a depth of feeling that made Hannah's heart soar. She spoke her own promises clearly, without hesitation, sealing her future to his with absolute certainty. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night. Tables groaned with food, whiskey flowed freely, and the band played everything from waltzes to lively reels. Hannah danced with her new husband until her feet ached, then watched with delight as he was dragged into a spirited dance with the elderly women of the town. "You've brought out a side of him none of us knew existed," Sheriff Adams commented as he brought Hannah a cup of punch. "Never seen Henry Sutton smile so much in all the years I've known him." "He makes me happy too," Hannah replied, her eyes following her husband across the dance floor. As the evening wound down, guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and good wishes. Henry found Hannah sitting with Elena watching the last dancers. "Ready to retire, Mrs. Sutton?" he asked, offering his hand. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, I believe I am." They thanked their guests and made their way to the house, where Alina had prepared the master bedroom with fresh linens and flowers. At the door, Henry surprised Hannah by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a smile as he carried her across the threshold. Alone in their room with moonlight streaming through the curtains, Hannah felt a moment of shyness despite their previous kisses and embraces. Henry seemed to understand, giving her space to prepare for bed while he stepped onto the balcony. When she called him back in, wearing the fine white nightgown she'd brought from Boston, he approached her slowly, his expression filled with tenderness. "You are so beautiful," he said softly, taking her hands, "and I am the luckiest man in the Wyoming territory." Hannah smiled up at him, her earlier nervousness melting away. "Show me," she whispered. He did, with gentle hands and reverent kisses, teaching her the language of love between husband and wife. Hannah discovered a passion within herself that matched his own, and in their joining found a completeness she had never imagined possible. Afterward, lying in his arms as the first light of dawn crept into the room, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of a man whose fierce exterior concealed depths of tenderness she was only beginning to explore. "What are you thinking?" Henry murmured against her hair. Hannah smiled, nestling closer to him. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most valuable treasures are those hidden beneath the hardest surfaces." He chuckled, the sound vibrating pleasantly against her cheek. "Are you calling me hard-headed, Mrs. Sutton?" "Perhaps," she teased, "but I wouldn't have you any other way." His arms tightened around her. "I promise you won't regret your choice, Hannah. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." She believed him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from the Harringtons, the harsh Wyoming climate, or the general difficulties of carving a life from this beautiful but unforgiving land, they would meet them as partners, their strength multiplied by the love growing between them. Hannah Newman had come west afraid of the wolf of Wyoming's fearsome reputation. Hannah Sutton was now grateful for the steel beneath her husband's gentleness, for she understood that, in this wild country, both qualities were necessary for survival and prosperity. And in the years that followed, as they built their life together, expanding the ranch, welcoming children, weathering both natural disasters and human conflicts, she never once regretted looking beyond the reputation to discover the true heart of the man she had married. The battle with the Harringtons did come, as predicted. James Harrington returned from Denver with partial backing for a smaller mining operation, but faced with the united opposition of all the valley's ranchers led by Henry, and supported by documentation of potential water contamination that Hannah had helped research, the mining company eventually abandoned their plans in favor of less contested locations. Their first child, a son they named William, was born just over a year after their wedding, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. Both children inherited their father's determined nature and their mother's questioning mind, growing up strong and capable on the ranch that continued to thrive under Henry and Hannah's joint stewardship. As Cedar Springs grew from a small settlement into a proper town, complete with a school where Hannah occasionally taught, Henry's reputation gradually transformed. The feared Wolf of Wyoming became known instead as a respected community leader, a fair businessman, and a loving husband and father whose greatest ferocity was reserved for protecting those he loved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they stood together on the hill beneath the oak tree where they had married, Henry presented Hannah with a leather-bound journal in which he had written their story from the first letter she had sent in response to his advertisement to the life they had built together. "So our grandchildren will know how it began," he explained, his hair now liberally streaked with silver, though his blue eyes remained as clear and intense as ever. Hannah, still beautiful at 32 despite the lines that Wyoming's sun and wind had etched around her eyes, leaned into his embrace. "They'll know that appearances can be deceiving," she said, "and that sometimes the happiest endings come from the most unlikely beginnings." Henry kissed her then, with all the tenderness and passion that had marked their decade together. "Not an ending," he corrected gently. "Just another chapter in a very long story." Hannah smiled up at the man who had first terrified, then intrigued, and finally captured her heart. "A very long story indeed," she agreed, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever adventures still awaited them, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, their love only strengthened by the challenges they overcame. And in that moment, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, Hannah Newman Sutton offered a silent prayer of thanks for the courage that had brought her west to discover that, beneath the fearsome reputation of the Wolf of Wyoming, beat the true heart of a gentle man, the heart she would cherish for all the days of her life.